Good morning. Good morning, Lizzie, Chris, John. Good to see you. And good morning from the UK. Good morning to everybody in the Western Balkans. Today, we will have also the team, my colleague Alex and Tia, who is in Belgrade, actually both of them are in Belgrade, who will be helping us that Zoom runs smoothly. If you apologize, I will speak now in Serbo-Croat language for the Western Balkan for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to English, which will be today's language of presentation. Thank you. Dobro jutro svi iz Britanije. Dragi učesnici prve mentorske sesije Uvod u tržište hrane u Velikoj Britaniji i šta je potrebno da znate. Hvala vam na prisustvu i sigurni smo da će današnja obraćanja i diskusija biti od značaja za regionalnog proizvođača hrane kod plasmana na ovo dinamično i sve značajnije evropsko i svetsko tržište. Današnja mentorska sesija je samo jedna od 5 planiranih sesija sa jednom od vodećih britanskih eksperta danas koji su sa nama u oblasti hrane i maloprodaje, koja je pokrenuta sa ciljem pripreme kompanije izlagača na Međunarodnom sajmu hrane u Londonu od 20. do 23. IFE, ali i svim onim kompanijama sa značajnim potencijalom za izvoz voća i povrća, svežeg, prerađenog i proizvoda od istog, prema tržištu Velike Britanije. Osvrnula bi se da nakon Brexita tržište voća i povrća u Velikoj Britaniji raslo je po stopi od 19% od 2022. u odnosu na 2021. uz očekivanje još daljeg širenja tržišta i povećanja potražnje za svežim, smrznutim i prerađenim voćem i povrćem, privatnom markom proizvoda, organskim proizvodima i visoko kvalitetnim i premium također. Tržište Velike Britanije pruža značajne mogućnosti za plasman i prodaju hrane, posebno u takozvan niša segmenta tržišta, koje mogu biti posebno interesantne za regionalne izvoznike visoko kvalitetnih proizvoda. Što smo i prometili pa po našim učesnicima u prvih 10 shortlisted, actually 17 shortlisted, da imamo puno premium robe koja je fantastična. Današnje mentoring sesije se organizuju u okviru projekta Organizacije za hranu i poljoprivredu Ujedinjenih Nacija, FAO, i Evropske banke za razvoj i obnovu, EBRD, pod nazivom Podrška diversifikacije izvoza poljoprivrednog i prehrambenog sektora Zapadnog Balkana i Istočne Evrope, koji je usmeren ka pružanju podrške regionalnim kompanijama u prisustvu novim tržištima i jačanju konkurentnosti poljoprivrednog i prehrambenog sektora. Ja bih sada prestala da govorim, pošto imamo divne govornike. Imam priliku da vam predstavim John Giles, sorry John, I feel bad what I said, his colleague Lizzie Dawes, and Professor Chris Bishop. From now, we'll be speaking in English. Our colleagues don't speak our language yet, but I'm sure after the 5th session, you will be speaking perfect Western Balkans. Well, good morning, John. Will you be kind to let us know all about this exciting market, UK, where our companies can't wait to come end of March. Thank you, John.
Good morning, Jadranka, and thank you for inviting us, and Alex, of course, and your other colleagues, and all the people who've joined us this morning. I can see there's about 25 people listening in this morning, and obviously we hope they find what we've got to say of interest. And this is just the first of a number of sessions we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. I think we're going to do more sessions on, particularly the fresh and dried market, or market for dehydrated products, and then also frozen fruits and vegetables, which we know that the Western Balkans has a reputation for in the past, and good opportunities going forward. And today is really much a sort of, I suppose, an introduction to the UK agricultural and food market, and some of the key features of it, and sort of setting ourselves up for the sessions that are going to follow on more specifically about fresh and dried and frozen products. And I think Chris is going to sort of join us later on this morning and sort of give some reflections on what we're saying. And then obviously there's an opportunity for questions and answers at this stage. But the questions and answers, the questions could come this morning, or they could come tomorrow morning, or later in the week. We don't mind.
On Thursday, John, we have
Thursday or whatever. But the
next
questions,
week.
yeah, if people want to ask questions or there's things that they want to find out or know more about, they don't have to. You know, if there's not time today, they can always ask through you, Jadranka, in the time, and we're here to try and give a perspective of what's going on. And so I'm going to share so thanks very much for asking us to join. It's a pleasure to be involved, and I'm going to share my screen now, hopefully, and this will just bring up the presentation, and hopefully that's showing. Yep. Can people see that?
Perfect.
Okay, and so I'm going to say a few things to begin with, and then Lizzie will say something, and then sort of come back to me, and again Lizzie. So it's a joint presentation between myself and Lizzie. And as you know, Jadranka, just in our conversations, I've been with Promar for quite a long time now, and I've been very fortunate. I've worked a lot in I've worked all around the world, but that includes coming to Eastern Europe and Southeast Europe and some of the Balkan countries in the past. And Lizzie, again, has probably you've been here a little less long than I, Lizzie, but you've also spent quite a bit of time in Eastern Europe and some of these countries we're talking about today. So we hope we've got a sort of a well-rounded perspective of what's going on, and what has gone on in the past, what's going on at the moment, and what might happen in the future, and clearly the opportunities it presents for the countries that you're working with, Jadranka and Alex, in the Western Balkans. So this presentation is just quite a simple title, sort of what you need to know about the UK for agri-food market. And I suppose the short answer to that is you need to know lots. There's a lot to know. So the companies that are successful in the UK, it was interesting, Jadranka, you were telling us that as a result of the trade agreement signed post-Brexit, that exports have been increasing to the UK. That's wonderful.
Over 20% for each country.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. That's the whole. That's actually some good news that's come out of Brexit for the UK. But yeah, what do you need to know about the UK market? It's quite a challenging market, and so you need to know lots. And the companies companies and the countries that do well, one of the characteristics they have, wherever they are, whether they're in Latin America or Southeast Europe or maybe parts of Africa or Asia, one thing that the successful companies and countries have in common is they are well informed about what's going on, and they understand a lot about the UK market. So just as an introduction, Promar, we're a consultancy company. There are three key parts of Promar. There's a farm consultancy, there's an agri-food supply chain team, which Lizzie and I both work in, and we have an environment and sustainability team. We have about 145 people working for us, so we're quite a large company for what we do. And as I was explaining to you last week, Jadranka, we've been going, we've been in existence for sort of 40, probably 50 years now. And so hopefully that says something about the longevity of our company. And then in turn, we are part of a much bigger sort of agri-business company called Genus. And Genus, so Promar has about 145 people working for us. Genus is a much bigger entity, has almost 3,000 people, and they are spread around the world in various countries. Europe is still very important to us, but growth coming from parts, sort of no surprise, growth coming from countries in Southeast Asia and Latin America, India, China, Southeast Asia in particular, basically. And Genus's shares are traded on the stock exchange in London. So we are the consultancy arm of Genus. And the agri-food team that Lizzie and I work in, the sorts of things that we get involved with in particular, looking at sort of market research and consultancy. All our work is in agriculture, food and drink. So the company over a period of time will be involved in a wide range of projects, but the common theme is that they're all agricultural, food and drink. And we look at the whole value chain from the actual production of fruits and vegetables all the way through packing, grading, processing, marketing, exporting, and then into the target market in question. So we'll be looking at the retailing environment, but also maybe the demand for fruits and vegetables in what they call the food service sector, so hotels, restaurants, and so on and so forth. And over the years, we've done a lot of work in fresh and processed foods, and particularly in horticulture, basically. So that's just a little bit about who we are. And even with COVID being in place over the last 3 years, which has changed the way lots of people work around the world, we've managed to still work in about 40 countries around the world. So life is always quite interesting at Promar, and that might be work clearly in the UK where we're based, but also in other parts of the European Union, Middle East, parts of Latin America, Southeast Asia, China, India, and the States. So again, I think hopefully sort of working not just in the UK, but also working with clients and looking at markets in other parts of the world, it gives us a sort of a wider perspective of what's going on in the world and maybe why it's going on. And most importantly, what are the opportunities for companies in the Western Balkans going forward? And we'll touch on those today, but also we'll talk about them in more detail, Jadranka and Alex, later in the week and next week when we do the follow-up seminars. Mm-hmm. And I think that the first thing before I hand over to Lizzie would say is that if you're going to be a good exporter, you need to become a real expert on the market you're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at the UK market. So this is probably the glamorous bit of exporting is attending international trade shows and going on visits and coming to the UK and meeting customers and traveling around the country. And that can be very exciting. This is probably some of the sort of less glamorous part of the job. But I think you need to know as much as you can about the UK, and not just what's happening in our food markets, but almost what's happening in the country in general. So you understand the sort of the broader context in which you're operating. So, clearly in the UK, Great Britain is made up of 4 countries: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. England is by far the biggest of those 4 countries. But understanding about the population, the trends, the UK population is actually, unlike many other European countries, the population in the UK is still gradually increasing, and what have you. And it's a relatively wealthy market. And obviously there are economic challenges at the moment. But if you look at the per capita income of the UK, we are still largely a relatively wealthy country. But I would encourage anybody who's looking to export to the UK market to sort of try and get a feel for what's happening here and become an expert on the UK. So maybe listening into our news programs, which are on at 10 o'clock at night, that will tell you what's happening in the UK and what matters to the UK at the moment and what consumers are worried about or hoping for or expecting in the future. Again, sort of looking at our newspapers, the biggest selling newspaper in the UK is The Sun. Now, it's not probably the most intellectual newspaper ever that's been published in the UK, but if you read The Sun, you'll get an understanding of some of the sort of British psyche and what we're thinking as a country, basically. But you also probably want to be looking at some of the more sort of what they call the broadsheet papers, like The Guardian and The Telegraph in particular, that will give you a sort of perhaps a slightly more balanced perspective of The Sun is a very populist sort of newspaper, but it will give you an indication of what people are thinking in the UK. But as well as The Sun, you also need to read The Guardian and probably the Telegraph. And then you need to understand what our politicians are thinking at the moment. And if you can tell us in the UK what our politicians are thinking at the moment, we've had a fairly turbulent time since maybe over the last 3 or 4 years, it's been a turbulent time politically in the UK. A lot of it sparked by the decision to leave the European Union, but that had been building up for a long, long time. But the last 3 years politically in the UK have been quite turbulent in a way that maybe in the UK we haven't really seen this in the UK maybe for quite a long time. So it's been unusual for us. But trying to understand, the political sentiment in the UK, not least with sort of trade deals, and it's great to hear, Jadranka, that we've got a trade deal with countries in the West Balkans, and they proved it's great to hear that they actually work. as well. They do actually produce increased trade, because that's the whole objective of a trade deal. And one reason we left the European Union was to develop our own trade deals with countries that were outside the European Union. So it's quite encouraging to hear. That's the sort of thing that maybe doesn't, it's not the sort of thing we hear an awful lot about in our media, on our news.
No.
What have you. So it's good to hear that's A, it's been done, and B, that it's actually been successful, really. So trying to understand, to be a good exporter, you need to know as much as you possibly can about the market that you're looking at. And those are my initial comments. And Lizzie, I'm going to hand over to you now for the next few slides, and you're going to talk us a little bit about. You're going to talk a little bit about our production in the UK, but also what we import and some of the characteristics of the UK market.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thanks, John.
Okay, so over to you, Lizzie.
Perfect. Are you all right to move the slides on? Perfect. That's
yeah, you tell me when you want me to move the slides.
That's great. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to talk to you today. So I guess what we're looking at on this side is what horticultural production is like in the UK on an annual basis. In terms of fruit and vegetable production, in consumption, UK consumers are constantly being told we need to eat more fruit and vegetables and to eat a more balanced diet. One thing that gets a lot of publicity, even from when you're in school throughout your ages, is that we need to all be eating 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day. And that's something that continues, and this is why sort of horticulture production does continue to increase. But in terms of the UK's climate, we have a lot of restrictions in terms of the types of products that we can produce. As such, we do rely a lot on our imports. But as you can see, apples and strawberries are both huge products that we produce in the UK and consume. Strawberries, their season for growing and consuming UK strawberries is continually getting longer and longer, and mushrooms, they've got a very quick time to harvest, which is why the volumes will be so high there. Tomatoes, we'll see on a slide further on, is continue to increase in terms of their production, but a lot of that is in terms of done under greenhouses, tends to be in the southeast of the UK. And they're kind of our main areas of where our production's coming. Apples, we'd consume them as whole apples by fruit, or they might go into the juicing or the processing sector for cider making. So if we're ready to move on, John.
Yeah, I think it's probably sort of worth saying, Lizzie, that sort of apples, strawberries, mushrooms, they're quite dominant, but products like raspberries and blueberries is a real growth part of the UK. Well, not just the UK fruit and vegetable sector, but our production of blueberries, for example, in the UK is very modest compared to the, we're importing. We might grow about 6,000 tons of blueberries a year in the UK, but we probably import another 50,000 tons. So we are for some products we are very dependent on imports. But Lizzie, on to the next few slides.
So yeah, in terms of our self-sufficiency, you can see that we are hugely reliant on imports. As much as our government is continually trying to push us to produce more and more fruit and vegetables, our fruit production is only 25% of what we're actually consuming, and vegetables slightly higher at 60%, just because the climate suits vegetable production more and more. But we're very unlikely ever to meet that 100% self-sufficiency, just in terms of the size of our population and the scale that we've got in terms of agricultural land within the UK. So imports are really important to us here in the UK.
Next slide, Lizzie.
Yes, please, if that's okay. So in terms of what we're importing, so here we've looked at a 5-year split. So what we were importing in 2016 and how that's changed through to 2021 and the leading products. So as you can see, actually, we've had a drop in imports in terms of tomatoes and apples due to, and that's been sort of displaced and replaced by UK production increasing. So where we've dropped in terms of tomato and apple imports, we've increased our production to plug that gap. However, there are products that we just can't keep producing enough of. So cucumbers, that's remained broadly stable in terms of our imports. Pears, they've dropped a bit, and they'd be very similar to apples and tomatoes in terms of UK production increasing there. Supermarkets have got sort of a preference, or they market more for British produce a bit more. So having the British flag on sort of apples and pears, it does help a little bit, but they are very seasonal. So we really do require those imports for other times of the year. Strawberries, our imports have increased. Whilst our production remains really high, the hunger for strawberries, it just continues to increase, and especially out of season as well. So we want strawberries on the supermarket shelves in December when you're doing your Christmas dinner and things like that. So people are wanting these products all year round. Plums has slightly decreased, again, a product that would be produced in the UK a bit as well, but raspberries, our imports have increased, and that goes along with, we get told a lot about superfoods, and berries are seen as a superfood, so we want to be eating more and more of them, which is why our demand for raspberries will have increased, and we need help in terms of the imports from them, because whilst we do produce a lot of raspberries, we don't produce enough of them, and they're quite a valuable product as well. Is that okay? Anything else to add there, John?
Yeah, sure. Next slide.
Perfect, thank you. So imports of frozen fruit and veg. So we've got a trend for frozen fruit increasing. So a lot of people have gone into making smoothies and liquidizing products nowadays, and frozen fruit fits a lot into that. You just get it out the freezer, put it in the blender, and you put it in with kind of spinach, kale, those kinds of things, and they have these really healthy drinks that makes them feel great for the day, really. And frozen fruit also allows for a much longer shelf life, so supermarkets prefer it. You can bring it back, put it in your freezer, and 5 days time it's still frozen in the same condition that you bought it, whereas buying these things and putting them in the fridge, sometimes you can't then touch them for 10 days. You remember that you've got it, and then by the time you come to use it, it's gone moldy. So frozen fruit continues to grow in popularity, and in terms of our sources for that, sort of Poland and Latin America and Chile are really good sources in terms of where we're importing from for there. Thanks, John.
Next slide, Lizzie. Yeah.
Yes, please. And imports of dried fruit and veg. So dried fruit, sorry. So as you can see, it's been a gradual increase basically to 2018. And from there, we've seen a gradual decline. However, the market still is huge there, and it presents a great opportunity. Our leading suppliers in the dried fruit sector would be Turkey, California, South Africa, and Chile. And much of the dried fruit that we import goes into the bakery sector, so both by food processors. So this time of year we eat a lot of hot cross buns, so they're around Easter time, and they're filled with dried fruits, but as well you've got the in-home market, so whether that's eating raisins as a snacking food, or for putting into baking that you're doing at home. As well as that, they're seen as a bit of a superfood as well. So in terms of like dried cranberries, seen as good healthy foods for us to be stacking on, rather than the alternatives of chocolate, which is what the government keep pushing us towards, eating those kinds of products. And they have a lot of positive advertising around and marketing towards us. If that's all right, John.
Yeah.
And so basically this slide shows that within the UK, we're basically importing something from every country in the world. And that's something that's not going to change. We've got a huge population for a relatively small landmass. We can't produce enough food for our own country ourselves. We've got restrictions in terms of our climate, so we have sort of winters and summers, and we can't be growing a lot of those products outside of those times, so we really do we'll always be requiring imports from countries all around the world to make sure that we've got the diversified food offering that we've got, with our population traveling more and more around the globe, then wanting to bring those foods and the different cultures and tastes back to the UK. So our consumers are continually demanding those products, whether we can produce them or not.
And I think the other important thing there is that the companies that in Southeast Europe, Jadranka and Alex, that will deal, the companies that want to export to the UK, they'll be dealing with companies who are very used to dealing with suppliers of fresh produce or deep dried or frozen or canned or juices from all around the world. And so they sort of dealing with people, whether they're in Southeast Europe or Latin America or parts of Africa or Southeast Asia. This is day to day for them. This is what they do basically. So they're very, very familiar with dealing with people from different countries around the world with different cultures. We're very fortunate in the UK that obviously English is used as a business language by many, many people around the world. But the companies that your companies will deal with will actually be very, very familiar with doing business with people from many other parts of the world. And despite what's happening through Brexit and as a result of what's happening in the Ukraine and the incredible food inflation we've been seeing, not just in the UK, but in many, many countries around the world, the UK is still going to be dependent on imports. So for the companies in Southeast Europe, in the Western Balkans, they're going to be trading and doing business with people who are very familiar with operating with many different parts of the world, and have the choices to trade from where they want to, really, for the products that are in question. I think just next few slides on me. Anybody coming to the UK will feel and sort of recognize the influence of, we have 4 supermarkets in the UK: Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's and Morrison's. We have 4 supermarkets that control about 70% of the 70% of the overall food market. The single biggest of those is Tesco. They have about 28% of the market, and then I think Sainsbury's have 15%, and so do Asda, and Morrison's have about 10% basically. So there are 4 supermarkets that you even if you're not actually supplying those supermarkets, you will feel their influence on the UK market, because they have a big say in what happens in the UK market. Although in the last 5-6 years, they've begun to feel, and Lizzie will probably talk about this a bit later on, but they've begun to feel that more and more the pressure being put upon them by, I think, a number of things. Online retailing, although who've been very quick to invest in online retailing. It's been these sorts of companies: Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's and Asda. They've all put significant sums of money into online retailing activity, but probably as much, if not more so, the pressure from the German discounters like Lidl and Aldi in particular, who sort of 10 years ago, they had almost had nil activity in the UK, and they've come in and they've almost turned the market on its head, basically. And so these 4 supermarkets are still incredibly important, but they, for the first time in a generation, they haven't got things all their own way. Now, they are feeling pressure from online retailing, and particularly from the discounters. But spend any time in the UK, and you cannot ignore the power and the influence of these major retailers in the food market. And as I said, this is just sort of really confirms. So look, Tesco is significantly bigger than the others. They've seen their market share come down. Sainsbury's, again, the second leading retailer, just over 15%, but their share has come down slightly in the last few years. The same with Asda and with Morrison's. But here we are, the next one up. Look at the growth of Aldi. That's why the share of the other retailers has been coming down. And look at the growth of Lidl. They've seen significant growth. And then there's 1 or 2 others like the Co-op and Waitrose are also influential and quite important. But the top 4 still account for 70% of the overall market. Their collective market share, their individual market share is under pressure. The growth is coming from supermarkets like Aldi and Lidl, both German discounters, and they have almost revolutionized the way we shop in the UK over the last 5 years. And Pete, I think when I was talking about our presentation to Lizzie last week, she said, "John, what does slide 14 mean?" This is something we've heard said, that when you deal with a supermarket in the UK, you're not dealing with a teddy bear. You're dealing with a grizzly bear. And so they are large businesses. They're quite aggressive in their purchasing strategies. They are demanding to deal with. They have high technical standards of processing and food safety and packaging. And I know, Chris, something you'll talk about later in the week is the sort of the need for good packaging when you're exporting to the UK. But they are very demanding. They're demanding technically. The quality standards they require, the sort of standards of the factories that they want to buy or are willing to buy from, they have to be high. There's a number of accreditation schemes. Things like the British Retail Consortium has its own accreditation scheme to ensure that food coming from factories are of a certain standard, and also commercially in terms of the terms and conditions of business that they adhere to, and they expect their suppliers to adhere to. They are also demanding. So I'm interested to know, Jadranka, and if we hold this sort of session in 2 or 3 years' time, how your companies in Southeast Europe and Western, how do they see the supermarkets? Do they think they're teddy bears, or do they think they're grizzly bears? I think they're going to find. Having said that, there are companies, as we went back to this slide here, there are companies all around the world have found the way to deal with British supermarkets. So it's not impossible, but it does take a bit of thinking about, and it does take a bit of planning, and you have to accept that you're probably dealing with a grizzly bear, not a teddy bear, basically. So, Lizzie, I'm going to hand back to you for the next couple of slides. I think you're going to talk about some of the other key drivers in the UK food market at the moment.
Perfect, thanks, John. So I guess to start off with, we've got Brexit. So whether that's been favourable or not, it differs in opinions in the UK, but it's definitely caused a lot of trade friction. And UK to Europe, there has seen a lot of new restrictions. So in terms of us trying to get food into Europe, there's a lot more hoops that we're having to jump through. It's not quite as easy. We've had a lot of issues in terms of Northern Ireland and the borders over there. That's caused a lot of areas, and I think it's just recently been rewritten and launched, and it will be voted on. However, the restrictions on imports into the UK, which was a big argument for Brexit, we can have a lot more control over our borders, what's coming in. Actually, that hasn't been acted upon quite yet. So those haven't been put in place. So importing into the UK is relatively easier at the moment. However, it's still causing a lot of headaches and a lot of issues in terms of supply, and a lot of the prices have increased. For example, we've had sort of second news story in the UK news recently was that we haven't got enough tomatoes and cucumbers, and there's been shortages of those on the shelves, mainly because of the lack of production in Spain and those key exporting areas. But they're probably not going to look to export straight to the UK when we've said, oh, actually, we don't want anything to do with Europe at the moment. So that has caused a lot of issues. And we've seen food inflation sort of at its highest level, double-digit figures this last year. And Brexit has definitely had a role within that. In terms of COVID, so that's been a huge disruptor, probably global-wide, really. And when it was happening back in 2020, there was a lot of shortages in our supermarkets. There was a lot of panic buying, and consumers did do a lot more cooking at home, and the eating out market in terms of food service hasn't completely recovered. So at weekends, they're back to where they used to be in terms of their sales, but they do have reported they're a lot quieter, sort of like Monday to Thursday, that there's not quite the demand there. online, so that continues to be a huge market. So a lot of consumers are doing their grocery shopping online, and that's being delivered to us at home. And all the grocery retailers are having their own bespoke delivery services there, and even the discounters, who have been the last ones to join on to that, they've even gone to that area now. So they allow online shopping and click and collect. So you drive to your discounter and you can pick up your food and food there. And it all drives back to convenience, lack of time in terms of consumers, and wanting somebody to come and drop their shopping off at 9 o'clock at night for them. And you've even got the likes of Amazon now, who are doing they've got sort of fruit and veg delivery there that you can get to, and you've got easy pickup points that, not in terms of fruit and veg, but I mean, if you want to buy things online, you can go and get them delivered to a box that you have a code for and go pick it up, and then you can also put your returns in there as well. And it's all about making it as easy as possible for consumers to use. And it is still a small market, but we've got veganism and the dairy-free and the other free-from markets that are all gaining popularity. They're quite stylish. They've got quite a few influencers and celebrities that go down that avenue, and it's definitely been picked up by consumers. You go into supermarkets and the vegan and the free-from aisles are getting larger and larger. When you go out and eat out, one of the first things people ask you is if there is any allergies, and there's always a vegan and a vegetarian option. And then we have something called Veganuary. So in terms of January, there's a lot of promotion around eating a vegan diet in that month. Have you got anything else that you'd like to add on that?
I'm just going to say quickly, Lizzie, if you think about it, so there's a lot. These are just 4 things that are changing, and we've got a few more things that Lizzie's going to talk about. But actually, through COVID, people's awareness of healthy eating probably increased, and fruits and vegetables is very much part of that. So I think look, COVID was a terrible situation, not just in the UK, but around the world, really. But actually, in all these situations, there are some winners and there are some losers. So maybe healthy eating received a boost, and fruit and vegetables is very much a part of that. And I think also, if you think about it, although the number of genuine vegans in the UK is relatively small, there is a trend towards eating less meat, a trend towards eating less dairy and plant-based meals. Now, again, for a fruit and vegetable farmer, actually that's quite good news. It's not quite so good news if you're a dairy farmer or a beef farmer or a pork farmer or whatever, but if you're a fruit and vegetable farmer, it's actually quite news, because people will be eating more fruits and vegetables. And on that note, Lizzie, I'll go on to the next slide and let you pick up again.
No, that's perfect. So in terms of agri-tech, so this is an area that's continually evolving, and a big focus for government support and funding for businesses. And basically it all centres around us trying to increase productivity. So if we can get more yields from either the animals that we're producing, as well as in terms of the crops that we're producing, it's all a very big positive to increase our productivity. And it's also about looking at alternatives for our diet. So whether we can be getting our proteins from insects and things like that. It sounds a bit strange, but it's all where the government are looking at doing, and it all drives back to sustainability, which we'll touch on now, and protecting the environment. So it's making sure that our carbon footprint's a lot lower. A lot of our supermarkets, if you're supplying to them from the UK, are looking at, they're wanting a carbon footprint for your milk, for your animals. They're looking at the emissions side of things, and it's where particularly the livestock sector gets a lot of bad press in terms of it not being good, and we need to eat more plant-based diet because it's more sustainable and more environmentally friendly. Moving on to sustainability, it's the single largest driver in our market, and one which we'll focus on a future session. But it's all about protecting the environment and ensuring our resilient supply chains, and producing a sustainable production going forwards. Everybody wants to be able to make sure that the environment is going to be where it is, in many decades and generations to come. And there was a big news article over the weekend about the the seas are going to be a lot more protected. It's not just the 200-mile radius around the countries, it's going into the big seas, and they're going to be a lot more protected in terms of the fishing rights and things like that. And that all drives back to sustainability, and it's in consumers' minds a lot more these days. In terms of food security, so the Ukraine had a huge impact within the UK market, and caused increased prices throughout the supply chain. So for farmers, they saw fertilizer prices rocket. For consumers, they saw petrol prices nearly hit £2 a litre, and along with that, as I touched on earlier, food prices, so food inflation has seen double-digit increase this time, and for every consumer going into the supermarket, they're seeing an increase in the price of what they're purchasing their food for, which has a great big impact, and they're looking more at what they are purchasing. And then the UK will never be self-sufficient, so the supply chain of importers needs to be become more resilient, and consumers are increasingly seeing the impact of what the supply chain can have on their prices, and it's been more and more highlighted in the news. And as we touched on earlier, the issues in Spain in terms of their production leading to empty shelves of tomatoes and cucumbers in the UK. The consumers are getting more and more insightful about that, and it's being promoted more and more. And then, as John touched on, in terms of the discounters, they've become more and more dominant, and consumers aren't scared about saying that they're shopping in discounters anymore. Sort of like 5-10 years ago, you wouldn't say, oh, I shop in Aldi or Lidl, because it kind of, you'd think people had looked down their nose at you. But nowadays, everybody will, you see Range Rovers and the posh cars in Liddy and Aldi, and then they might just pop to Waitrose, which is a premium retailer, for their bits. It's kind of all about that, and they have become more and more dominant, and they're doing a really good job. And now they're moving into the online shopping sector. They're probably only going to become more dominant going forwards. You look at the amount of stores that are going to be opening each year, Sainsbury's, those kinds of ones aren't opening masses of stores, but Aldi, they're opening one store a week kind of thing. So they're the ones to be supplying into, because they're the ones that are really growing, and the other ones are fighting after them, making sure that they've got the essentials line. So they're trying to compete on price. They're bringing down the number of products and lines that they're doing. So I had a call with the Co-op, which are a small local retailer, and they're reducing the number of SKUs they've got on the shelves, because it all comes down to trying to bring their prices down so that they can be a little bit more competitive against these discounters that have just stolen the market recently from them. So I think that's it, John, unless you've got anything else to add on that.
I think that's a very good sort of summary of what's going on, Lizzie. I think in terms of sustainability, you talked about that maybe the livestock sectors sort of get a lot of attention, but in horticulture, there's also a lot of attention on sustainability, and this would be around things like reducing use of pesticides, reducing use of plastics in the supply chain, water management, and all these sorts of things. So horticulture is not immune from this trend towards sustainability. We want all our farmers to be sustainable going forward, and who wants that? Well, the government wants it, because they've agreed to hit these sort of big targets, all set by international organizations. But retailers want this, and food processing companies want it, and consumers want it, and sort of some of the non-governmental organizations, they also want it. So who wants our farmers to be sustainable? Everybody is the answer, I think. And not only in the UK do we want them to be sustainable, we would want our farmers in Macedonia and Serbia and the Southeast European countries, and Chile and Turkey, and we want them all to be sustainable. So if you're going to supply the UK, one of the key things, you need to have good sort of technical skills, you need to have good quality products, but also you need to have a sustainability plan, and to be able to show and demonstrate to your customers that you're taking this issue very seriously, and you have steps in place to reduce your sort of carbon footprint going forwards. And I think the other thing you mentioned, Lizzie, was just our the attention on food security in the UK. For the last generation, for the last 2 generations, we've almost taken our food security for granted. And I think what's happened over the last 2 or 3 years, it's showing that we should be doing anything but taking our food security for granted. So again, I think, as you said, Lizzie, we need our suppliers, whether they're in the UK, whether they're in Southeast Europe, whether they're in Spain, whether they're in Chile, whether they're anywhere, we need them to have sort of, a degree of resilience in their operations that they can carry on supplying the UK, despite these huge supply chain shocks that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. And the last couple of things, Jadranka, just to mention, are things like, so what can the companies in Southeast Europe, in the West Balkan region, what can they expect if they look to try and develop a business, basically? Well, look, we've talked about the technical and the commercial demands that are put on suppliers, whether you're in the UK or any other part of the world. There is no exceptions here, basically. In fact, sometimes in the UK, you'll hear the farming community almost asking, well, we should be made an exception because we're British suppliers and therefore we should be dealt with differently. But I think the supermarkets have a view that, hey, they deal with all their suppliers in much the same way. High levels of technical demand and whatever, but also the commercial demands of working with them. And if anybody thinks that the UK is an easy option market, they're in for a bit of a shock. It's a very demanding market. It can also, if you get it right in the UK, it can also be a very lucrative market and a very rewarding market, but it's not an easy option market at all. And so Balkan companies must obey the basic rules of market entry. So they need to, either through their own efforts or maybe with people like you, Jadranka and Alex, your organizations and the organizations that you've got supporting this particular project, they need to research they need to find out a lot about the market. Not only sort of the macroeconomic trends that are going on in the market and what consumers are thinking and maybe what our politicians are thinking, but also the specifics of, if I want to supply frozen fruit to the market, what do I need to do? Who are the key players? What are the prices being paid in the market? What's the operating environment? What's the long-term potential? What are the sort of must-have criteria to be able to do that, and build the relationships with the key importers that control the supply of these products into the UK. And as we said, one of the features of those importing companies, and there are companies that specialize in tomatoes or apples or soft fruit or cucumbers or vegetables, or there are different companies for fresh and dried and frozen products. But they are all used to dealing with people from all around the world. So good news is that dealing with Southeast Europe will just be another part of the world that they do business with. But it takes time to build their confidence in what you're doing and what you're able to do, and so build those relationships. That can take a little bit of time. You need to really build a pragmatic business plan. People often, in our experience, tend to be very ambitious about what they can achieve and how quickly they can achieve it, but you need to build a pragmatic business plan and then test the market a little bit, and build these relationships on an ongoing basis. And it might take 2 or 3 years to do that really successfully, basically, and then evaluate what's been done and how it's been done and what's gone well. And maybe inevitably there will be 1 or 2 things that don't go quite so well, basically. So again, if companies in Southeast Europe are expecting overnight success, well, if they get it, fantastic. But it's often not the norm. It takes a bit of time to build the relationships and build the credibility and build the capability of supply, basically. And as I said, the UK market it's not an easy option market, but it's a large market. We are, even if our imports of apples and tomatoes have come down in the last few years, as I think Lizzie talked about earlier on, the volumes we're importing are still significant, hundreds of thousands of tons. In many cases, and we're not, no matter what we might like to think, I think the chances of us getting anywhere near self-sufficiency Look, Britain's never been self-sufficient in food, and I'm not sure we're ever going to be, basically. So the market is large, and that's good news. It's good news for people in the Balkans. It's also good news for people in other parts of the world as well. So you haven't got this market for yourselves, but the market is large, and your footprint in at the moment is relatively small. So there's a great opportunity to build your presence in the market over a period of time, basically. So I think that's what companies in Southeast Europe and the Western Balkans region can expect. And then I think you've got to ask yourself, your companies need to ask a number of sort of key questions, basically, Jadranka, sort of why do you want to be? Do you really understand why do you want to be in the UK market, and how much do you know about it, and where do the products you have, where do they fit into the overall supply portfolio, and how much are you prepared to do to get into the UK market and build a presence there? So how much are you going to put into meeting technical requirements, and that could be sort of factory accreditations, packhouse accreditations, it could be growing protocols, it could be investment in the infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So how much are you prepared to invest in meeting technical requirements, and then also in providing commercial support to your customers, basically. And essentially, how long can you wait for a positive result? This could take several years to really come to fruition. So you would hope for maybe some sort of short-term successes to give the whole project some sort of momentum, basically. But you need to sort of say we're prepared to work at this for several years to really make a success of it, basically. So how long can you wait for the positive result, whatever? And if you can answer those sorts of questions, I think you've got your companies, Jadranka and Alex, have got a good opportunity or good chance of achieving success. But they have to be sort of mega realistic about what it takes to be successful in the UK. Yeah. And then, yeah, as a summary slide, we're nowhere near self-sufficient in the UK for the products that we're talking about, in particular on this project, Jadranka. And so we have to import them.
Good news.
Yeah, that's good news. If we want them, we have to import them. Yeah. We have 66 million relative. The economy in the UK, like economies around the world, is finding life quite difficult at the moment. We have 66 million relatively affluent consumers in the UK. There are strong customers in both retail and the food service, catering, hotels, restaurants, etc. sectors, and I think that's good. I think you want strong customers to make if you've got strong customers, that eventually they'll make your company strong as well. We've got these highly experienced importers who are used to dealing with people from all around the world over a long period of time. And I think, in summary, what the UK wants, we want long-term supply arrangements with companies that have got sort of resilient supply chains. They've got a sustainability plan. They've got sort of technical competence. They've got commercial competence. So we want sort of supply arrangements with highly professional suppliers. We want high quality products and packaging. And Chris, you'll talk about packaging later in the week. We want people who can supply these products with good value and competitive prices. Why wouldn't you want that? That's almost a starting point for any discussion in the UK. And I think finally the last point is that we do have these strong buyers, particularly the sort of 4 or 5. Well, I think it's the 4 or 5 traditional supermarkets, and now we've also got our discounter retailers in the UK. They are all strong buyers, and essentially strong buyers need strong sellers. And that's where you come in, Jadranka, I think, right. Alex and your colleagues with FAO, with EBRD, and the companies that are listening today, to develop a capability where you are seen as strong sellers into the UK market.
That's correct.
And that's our sort of that's our introduction at this stage, basically. And as we said, there's going to be sort of further sessions later this week and next week, I think, Jadranka, when we'll talk about more specific. That's our sort of what do you need about the UK? What do you need to know about the UK at this stage? That's what I think you need to know.
Good. I wonder if Chris is there on his lovely dog.
Yes.
Are you there, Chris?
Yes. I'm here, and I'm afraid there may be a dog in the background. But can I just say, you could tell from the way Lizzie and John have been talking how sort of impassioned they are on this subject, and quite frankly, so am I. I think the importance of being well informed just cannot be overemphasized. You may find that, and also, you need to be well informed on your target market. With the major supermarkets, there was a time when one supermarket called their large size was exactly the same size specification as another supermarket had for their medium size. And one company lost a lot of money by thinking they knew the system, and they supplied the wrong specification. So you need to really concentrate on the specification for that, for your specific target. Terribly obvious, but people don't remember that. I think the fact of being well informed, one thing that either John or Lizzie mentioned, but probably you've got a real life example here, is we have an aging population in England, and we've got more and more people who are in the older sector. What they want may be slightly different, and it can be at times making sure that you're aware of that in your packaging, in what you're supplying, can be very important. I think I'm not going to talk for long because I'm conscious we're running out of time, but I really think that the importance of being well informed, making sure that you follow the specifications precisely. You may think that you've got the nicest tasting apple, and these really large apples from some part of the Western Balkans are particularly tasty. They may be very good, but if they're not what the British market wants, you're not going to sell them. So don't try and spend too long trying to persuade people to buy a particular unusual variety of whatever. The British market knows within limits what it wants. So make sure you cater, you supply the British market with what they believe they want. You can talk to them about these things, but don't spend too long on some particular variety of apple or raspberry or whatever it is, if it's not within one of the standard specifications. I think that's really, things like robotics may become more important. It may be that you need to supply your product in a package type that will fit in with various robotics that are coming into the UK. And that may be something you need to liaise and be aware of. But these are various aspects to do with packaging, which if I'm not careful, I will start talking on for too long. But really, I think John and Liz have given a good summary, but the important thing is to be well informed and follow the specification. And it's not going to be an overnight, success. I hope it's going to be quick, but it's not going to happen immediately. Okay, I'll then
Thank you, Chris.
pass over if we want any questions.
Next mentoring session, we'll be speaking in more details with you on Thursday and next week as well. Whilst we are waiting for the questions, I would like to wrap a little bit everything we heard today. And I have to say that was incredibly informative, even for me, who I have been living here for 25 years, and I should know some of stuff, but I don't. And it's interesting when we compare British market and as a British Serbian Chamber of Commerce, we are a British Chamber, bilateral, And it's interesting whenever we speak to regional chambers, for example, Great Manchester, Birmingham, Northern or whatever, London more or less, they know about the region, they just don't believe. So when I mentioned what we had today here about raspberries and blueberries in particular, Serbia in the region, Western Balkans, one of the largest producers, on the top 3 in the world. And when I share that, people said that can't be true. Very tasty tomatoes. We are very good. We are famous about plums, so we make that famous regional rakia šljivovica, what brand do we call? So there is a lots of there. There is a good sun, a lots of water, new technology, innovation. Products are there, but what we are trying to achieve and why this project with FAO and EBRD is actually to bring closer the region to the UK market. So that's what we are doing, and this is going to help really much open their eyes. On the other side, we bring companies to learn. You don't know about Britain if you don't come here, if you don't talk to you speak to the real British people, and they're different. British people are slightly different from all in the world. I live here, I know. I adore them. So it's not they're cold, they're just a little bit slightly different. About all of that, about the business, how we negotiate, we'll have a different time to talk about that. But you see, this today, I think is fabulous. We have 10 companies and we have fresh vegetables and fruits. We have frozen, we'll have dry, we have a premium. It is going to be a surprise, I hope, at IFE. So that's for me. Let's see from Alex, and I hope we can open the question. If you are not comfortable with English, please, ako engleski vam, molim vas napišite na našem jeziku. Alex također govori srpski, mi ćemo prevesti. So Alex, do we have any question?
We don't have any questions for now. Please do write your questions in the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll get them.
Is there? Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, John, are there any markets in recent years whose exporters could provide lessons to fruit and veg companies from Southeast Europe in terms of entering the UK markets?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alex. And yeah, so look, if you're a sort of first-time exporter from Southeast Europe, there's a lot to learn and what have you, and so maybe looking at other countries and learning from them and seeing what they've done well, and maybe also learning maybe the mistakes they've made as well, or things they've done less well. That would help sort of short circuit the whole process really, and accelerate your ability to grow. I think the first thing I just sort of say in response to what Jadranka was just talking about was, I think you're right, Jadranka. Yeah, people in the UK, maybe a little less so in the commercial world, but certainly at consumer level. What would we know about the supply of fruits and vegetables from Southeastern Europe? Relatively little. So there's quite a big challenge there to come and talk to the trade to begin with, and then they could be the importers, they could be the supermarkets, and eventually try and communicate with consumers about what products you have. And it's great to hear that you've got great water and nice sunshine and whatever. The trouble is, guess who else is saying that? Lots of other countries. So these things are not totally unique.
I want you to say they're very sweet and juicy. Is a good quality.
Yeah, but what do you think?
Spain has the same.
Yeah, in Spain,
Greece.
in many other countries, they'll be saying almost the same thing. So you need to think what is really different. There's a big difference between what you think is good and what other people think is good. And I've been lucky, Jadranka, I've been to many countries around the world, and the first thing any farmer tells me is that they are the best in the world. And it's good that people think like that. If you're not confident, then maybe why would you be doing it anyway? But hey, look, every farmer I've met in the world has told me that they are the best, and they genuinely believe it. And sometimes they are. Quite often they're not the best, and you need to think about what really differentiates you from the market. But if you're looking at countries that have done well over, and again, it's interesting, Alex, it's not just over the last few years. This all takes a bit of time to do, basically. But you could look at countries that are far away from Europe. So I think I'm fortunate that I've done a lot of work in Chile. And if you look at how Chile has developed its industry over quite a long period of time, they've been phenomenally successful, basically. And they're so strong. One of the key factors in Chile that have made them successful is the relationship between the public sector and the private sector, and they work very much together, basically, because the government, the public sector can't achieve this on its own, and probably nor can the private sector. You need the two coming together. And there's lots of other transferable lessons from Chile. I mean, closer to home, if you look at the people in Holland, wonderful. That's not a 5-minute success story, but their ability to grow fruits and vegetables in when most of the country is below water level, it's incredible, really. And they've only got a small population, and what have you, but they've got phenomenal technical expertise. They've also got the advantage to the UK that it's, you know,
it was a part of EU. It was quite different dynamics.
That's true, Jadranka. But also the distance between Holland and the UK is very short almost. So but Holland also exports to many other countries all around the world, which are not close to home for them. So there's something, they've got a very strong export they've developed over many years a very strong export mentality. There are other countries around the world, and we can talk about them in the next few weeks, Jadranka, as to who, but there are a lot. I think the key point is you can try and do all this on your own, or you can look at, in some cases, part of your learning process, part of your research and planning process is to look at one or two other countries around the world and say, what can we learn from them? How have they done it? What's worked well? What's maybe not worked so well? And can we sort of accelerate our own learning and development by looking at other people? And sometimes those people might be very close to home, and sometimes they might be the other side of the world. But it doesn't mean to say they're not valid or they're not useful comparisons to make. I can see there's a few questions in the Q&A now.
This is very interesting, John. I will quickly that's what you just said about good, maybe 2 case studies, the countries who did well. We might include that in how to export to the UK. We're also developing the guide from A to Z. So that will be one very good to include. Right, Alex, we have questions?
Yes, we now have some more questions. So we have a question here regarding the current situation with the supply for frozen fruits to the major British retailers. They've apparently received information that the supply of these products is currently on hold. Would you know if this is true or be able to elaborate on the situation at all?
I think Lizzie and Chris might have something to add to this, basically. But look, if you go, it can vary from retailer to retailer. It depends about their supply chain relationships, how well developed they are with their importers, and in turn their suppliers. Basically, there's no look. There's an obvious problem at the moment with the supply of fresh fruits and vegetables, and particularly tomatoes and cucumbers and these sorts of products that are coming from Spain and to some extent North Africa in particular, and we've also had problems in the UK with the supply of eggs going forward. That's more of a domestic market situation and what have you. So yeah, there is tremendous pressure on the supply chain at the moment, and there'll be 1 or 2 supermarkets that are perhaps have been short of frozen products, basically. And this is happening for a number of reasons. There's, you know, we could do a whole seminar, Alex, just on this subject alone, basically. But it's a combination of maybe sort of poor weather in some of the key producing countries. It's certainly I think an issue to do with you know, domestic production, that we are struggling sometimes in the UK, not least because of the labour situation, and then also because of the impact of the inflationary pressure seen as a result of the terrible situation in the Ukraine, and then I think finally, the impact of Brexit. But you know, for companies in Spain, for example, you know, dealing with the rest of Europe, still very straightforward. You know, no barriers to trade at all. When they come to the UK looks a slightly less attractive market. So if you're sitting there in southern Spain saying, right, shall I send my tomatoes to the UK or to Germany or to Holland or Italy? Well, look, the UK may have been a priority market in the past, but maybe not a priority market now. You put all these things together, and then this is why you get this situation where supply into the UK for imported products it's not a happy situation. Will it be resolved in the next few weeks? I think the answer is we very much hope so. But this is part of the reason why, you know, when we talk about our food security in the UK, people are now seeing it absolutely right in their faces, because they go into a supermarket and the products that they always assume would be there sometimes are no longer there.
Marks and Spencer, no salad, no cucumbers, nothing. Cambridge, unbelievable.
It's just an amazing situation.
A situation open opportunities, John, isn't it?
It does present opportunities.
Well, on that note, I would like, if no any other question, I'm sure that we have more.
We have
please.
quite a few.
We have plenty. Oh God, let's quickly go.
So we have for the next one, it is what is the UK confectionery market like? How developed is it? And do we have any particularly large countries that we import from?
I think confectionery, look, it's a huge market in the UK. It's dominated by multinational food companies, people like Cadbury's and Mars and Nestle, and what have you. I mean, you know, there's a certain part of society will be saying eating chocolate is one of the worst things that you can do. It's bad for it's bad for human health, but it's also, you know, where do we source our you know, that most of the confectionery is manufactured in the UK, and we're sourcing our cocoa from West Africa, and you know, the environmental impact of growing cocoa in Africa and then shipping it to the UK, that, you know, that is under a lot of attention. Basically, we also import confectionery from France, Italy, Switzerland. Yeah, look, we
all over the world, John.
Yeah, from all over the world. So nothing is impossible. But if someone said to me, confectionery from Serbia or Macedonia, I'd be thinking, yeah, I need to know a lot more. I need to know a lot more, basically. But if you said to me frozen fruit from Serbia and Macedonia and Kosovo, I'd say, yeah, that seems to make more sense.
Bosnia is very good. Bosnia is a part of the project.
Yeah,
let's not forget the name.
So look, nothing is impossible, but the confectionery market in the UK is a fairly mature one, and it's largely dominated by major brands. Lizzie, is there anything you'd like to add to that, do you think?
No, I'd just echo what you're saying, really, John, that it does tend to be the large brands that are really well known that you see globally everywhere, really. I guess there's small niches if you're doing sort of online retailing and things like that, but it does tend to be quite dominated by the big key players, really.
Who have lots of big resources, not least for advertising.
It's also becoming more and more, there's a lot more regulations in terms of how you can market, how you can promote, where you can sell the products in the supermarkets in terms of not near the checkouts and things like that. When can adverts be shown on the TV? It's all hopefully driving down our obesity levels in the UK, and that's why it gets a lot more attention from the UK government, really.
Right, Alex, can we have two more? They're very long, they keep coming. Can we promise, sorry, John, can we promise, I'm worried just about the time. Well, promise all the questions will be answered. We'll get back to you if you don't answer. Can we get a little bit something different? Or they repeat, Alex?
So right now we have a question on what is the best way to approach UK buyers, particularly offering them products from Serbia, Bosnia, or North Macedonia?
Yeah, I don't think there's any real rocket science to this, Alex. It's a good question, sort of very practical, isn't it? How do you even begin? I think you need to come to the UK market. It'll be very difficult to do any business, you know, without having come to the UK market. And the sorts of companies that we're talking about who control the imports of these products, they are very used to having international visitors. Some of them they'll have known for many, many years. Some of them will be the first time they met them, but they're often very, you know, part of their job is to be they also want to be well informed about what's happening in parts of the world that maybe haven't been traditional suppliers to the UK. So if there are big developments going in Serbia and Bosnia and Kosovo and Macedonia and throughout the region, then part of their job is to know what's going on. And so they're always very willing to, often very willing to meet people who they don't expect them to start supplying in, you know, in the next week. They probably don't want them to be supplying in the next week, but they want to sort of start. You've got to start building these relationships somewhere. So I think coming to the UK, coming to trade shows, and meeting some of these companies and explaining to them, you know, wherever you are whatever stage of the journey you're on, where you are, what your aspiration is for the future, what you'd like to do, why do you want to supply the UK market, what you understand about the UK market, what you still need to learn and get to grips with, basically. But and as we said in the presentation, this process, if it happened in 5 minutes, that would be great, wouldn't it? But this can take a little time to build.
I will say pure luck. That would be maybe something extraordinary.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any.
Things happen in life. You never know.
No, I don't think there's any real rocket science. You've got to come here and meet the companies, basically, who are involved in this trade and talk to them and discuss. And they probably wouldn't expect things to be absolutely perfect at this stage. If everything was perfect, you'd already be doing the business.
But also it's good at trade shows to see how other companies, other countries doing it. It's
absolutely.
Way you compare, and that is the beauty, where you learn from people how they talk to the buyers. And I think that's why we are so excited to have the actually 10 for FAO, but we have another 10. So 21 we have this year and another one in the different part of IFD. Yeah. I think I'm going to close today, if you don't mind. I will just quickly say in our language. Hvala puno svima za današnju prvu sesiju. Nadam se da ste svi da smo približili Britaniju svima danas. Nemoj da ljudima koji nismo odgovorili pitanje da budu razočarani, bit će odgovoreno na sve. Pripremite se sljedeći put. Sljedeća session je on Thursday, ali tako Alex, u četvrtak. Vidimo se ponovo u 10 sati i onda imamo još jednu posle toga za primjen i sljedeće nedelje. Hvala vam puno još jednom. I would like to thank very much to John, Lizzie, Chris, who I suppose he has to go, but he will be on Thursday. But also, this won't happen if with wonderful people, Alex Santer, Don Work, and Tiana, who is on the business forum at the moment of Component, wouldn't happen, and my colleague Richard. So here we are. Thank you everybody once. I would, if anything you would like to say, if not, I'm happy for today to finish the first session. Thank you very much. Thank you.